So yeah, thank you. My name is Abdul Ghaffar Karim. I'm the head of the Department of Politics and Government at Gajah Mada University, next door to Bu Iyi and Prof. Agus and Prof. Thomas. But we have never really met in real life. I mean, in person. So I will take this opportunity to really thank our speakers here. We have two leading activists on human rights in Indonesia. We are really grateful to have them here. We have Pak Raffendi Jamin. We have Bu Yuyun Wahyuningrum. Thank you for both of you for being here with us, sharing your perspective and experiences in, uh, you know, human rights struggle in Indonesia. And we're also glad to have Professor Thomas Schmitz and Professor Agustinus Suprianto. Also, thanks to both of you for being here. I believe this will be a very robust discussion today. So the core attendance of this course are the students from the APMA program and the Human Rights program in both faculties, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences and the Faculty of Law at Gajah Mada, and also some uh, guest students, I guess, also attending the sessions directly, and we are recording the sessions to be published later for wider audience. Mbak Iyi will chair this session, so I will just open this and we'll sit quietly and enjoy the session, taking notes and probably give comments if you know I have something to say. But Iyi, the time is yours. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Mas Ghaffar. Good morning, everyone. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Shalom, Salam Kebajikan, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So it is a great pleasure for me to chair this session. As Pak Ghaffar has mentioned before, this is a joint class on human rights master degree course organized by Visipol UGM and Mahidol University, ya Pak, and also in collaboration with the postgraduate program of Magister Legal Science of Faculty of Law UGM. So today's session, we have three distinguished speakers who have a great experiences on topic of the effectiveness of human rights mechanism, particularly in Southeast Asia region. So, of course, we are aware that there are progress in Asian country with regard to human rights. We do have Asean Charter on human rights. We do have Asean Declaration on the protection on women and children, and many other documents. But we do understand ASEAN has a very problematic with regard to the human rights protection as well. We do now see there are political conditions in some country in this region, for example, in Myanmar and Thailand. Beside the issue of migrants worker, the protection of women and children, refugees, the freedom of expression are still questions in several ASEAN countries. So today we want to learn about what are the role of regional mechanism, particularly AICHR. Yeah. So, and then we also want to know about the advocacy, the effort done by NGOs, civil society movement, academicians by using such mechanism, and how effective are they this mechanism from the perspective for those who are engaged directly with the mechanism, and of course from us from the academic perspective as well. So I will introduce you for the first speaker at first, that is Madam Yuyun Wahyuningrum, but I will call her as Mbak Yuyun because she is my colleague in early 2000. At that time, she was working with NGOs, work with children's rights. Yeah. Currently, she is the representative of Indonesian at ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. She has been working with the advocacy for human rights in regional and international level since early 2000, and she was also working in Asia Forum. She continued her journey as an advisor for human rights in ASEAN Parliament for Human Rights and several more experiences. She is also taking a PhD program. She's very busy in International Institute of Social Studies of Erasmus University, Rotterdam. Good morning, Mbak Yuyun. How are you?
Good.
Yeah. So, as you are now Indonesian representative for ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, I really want your insight about this institution. What actually the role of this institution? Whether this institution and other mechanism in ASEAN really has kind of contribution in protecting human rights in Southeast Asian countries. So we also want to know what are the challenges to make it work. So time is yours, Mbak Yuyun. Feel free to use your PowerPoint as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Mbak Id. Good morning, everyone. My name is Yuyun Wahyuningrum. I'm the Indonesian representative to the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights for the period of 2019 to 2021. I'm also graduated from Mahidol University because this project is joint project with Mahidol University. It is obligation for me to mention. I prepared my PowerPoint presentation. I would like to share that now.
Next, yeah.
Okay. We start from this, and I would like to just give a very quick context about Southeast Asia, because I only have 20 minutes. I leave this PowerPoint presentation to the university, so you can get this PowerPoint and read later. But I would like what I'm going to say in the context of human rights in Southeast Asia is that human rights are guaranteed in the constitutions of the ASEAN member states, except Brunei. Brunei constitutions mention about the role of the king, the sultan, the prime minister, and the parliament, but not necessarily about human rights in a very specific term. And 5 countries in ASEAN have national human rights institutions. I know that you will be engaging with them in one of the sessions. So I just would like to give you this without further detail because you will have a discussion with national human rights institution from Indonesia. These 5 countries are Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, and Thailand. The rest are still in the process or not necessarily interested to establish one. In terms of ratification, as you can see here, Cambodia, Philippines, and Indonesia are the countries that ratified the most international conventions. The rest are, as you can see here, Brunei, Malaysia, Myanmar, Singapore are the countries that ratified the least international instruments. Now, human rights problems. So this illustration taken from the ASEAN, this is not official ASEAN, but the name of the news is, the name of the portal is ASEAN News, I guess. But this is only some glimpse of what is actually happening in the region. But in reality, more than this. And then this is also the statistic coming from ASEAN Asia Democracy Network that highlights some issues in relation to freedom, like states to meet their commitment, international commitment on human rights. And some scholars also said about that regional human rights mechanism can develop regional human rights norms. So there will be national norms, there will be regional norms, there will be international norms. What we are trying to maintain here is how these all different kind of norms will be the new markers of a new ASEAN. So after a financial crisis, ASEAN want to come up with a new face of ASEAN, and human rights was one of them. In ASEAN, we have 2 regional human rights mechanisms. The first one is ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, which I'm now the commissioner. Pak Raffendi was the commissioner for 2 terms, 2009, 2012, and 2013 until 2015. And the other one is on ACWC, ASEAN Commission on the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Women and Children. Just very quickly on ACWC right now, because my presentation will be focusing on ICHR, or ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, but I would like to just mention about ACWC. It was inaugurated on 7th April 2010 during the chairship of Vietnam. ACWC is intergovernmental body. It is also a consultative body. It works based on the TOR, and it has 16 mandates. Ways of working similar with ASEAN in general, consensus, consultation. It has 20 members from 10 ASEAN countries. It means one country is represented by 2 persons, one commissioner working on women and the other one working on children. That is why they become 20 representatives. At the moment, ACWC has adopted number of important documents to promote and protect the rights of women and children in the region. Some of them was the ASEAN Declaration on Violence Against Women, Violence Against Children, ASEAN Declaration on the Protection of Children in the context of migration, ASEAN Declaration on Child Protection Online. So the last document, I think the proper name should be checked to Minister Meeting on Environment. It is responsibility of ICHR to engage with them to mainstream human rights in their work. So that's the example. ICHR also has a responsibility to protect the human rights. Only one mandate at the moment in the TOR. ICHR also has responsibility to come up with human rights strategy, as well as research, capacity building, and dialogue engagement with ASEAN member states, with ASEAN sectoral bodies, and also stakeholders in general, including scholars as well as civil society organization. In the last 10 years, ICHR has covered civil political rights, also social cultural rights. As you can see here, number of issues that ICHR has addressed through its engagement with member states, workshops, research, and some other approaches. On civil political rights, ICHR has addressed right to nationality, migration, trafficking in person, prevention of torture, media freedom, freedom of expression and opinion, freedom of religion and belief, right to life, right to an effective remedy, counter violent extremism from the perspective of human rights, access to justice, legal aid, juvenile justice. In terms of social cultural rights, right to development, right to water and sanitation, business and human rights, right to education, right to health. A lot of people perceive that because ASEAN was not necessarily friendly to human rights historically, ASEAN may be inclined to into social cultural rights. But if we look at how ICHR has been working in the last 11 years, apparently number of civil political rights has taken the attention of ICHR more. But now gradually ICHR also look at the social cultural rights, and also right to development and right to peace. ICHR also engage with different groups like women, children, persons with disabilities, chief of justice in the region, person with disability also. And so this is what I take from Matthew Davies' article of observation that in the last 10 to 11 years, ICHR has performed as educator, enabler, standard setter, and catalyst. So you can read what does it mean by these 4 functions later on. Now, protection. It is the main problem that ICHR is facing because human rights mechanism, either national, regional, or international, their very function is to protect human rights. But as we can see in the mandate, ICHR only have one mandate on protection. It is therefore from the previous batch of representative, the earlier time of ICHR. Recently, remember in the TOR, ICHR does not have a mandate to receive complaint, but now ICHR accept complaints from people in the region. But this complaint mechanism is quite minimal at the moment. It's only three-step complaint mechanism. Step one is to receive a complaint. Any complaints on human rights can be sent to the ASEAN Secretariat. And step two, ASEAN Secretariat will table it to ICHR meeting. And then the respected country will be able to respond if they wish. So this is quite weak at the moment, but it is an entry point. It is something that the previous batch of representative in ICHR actually has been working very hard to be able to come up with this. So from this point, we can continue to discuss and develop further the mechanism. And we have received a number of complaints after November, even before November 2019, we received a lot of complaints about human rights, but since we didn't have the mechanism in the time, no follow-up. But now we have this mechanism, three-step mechanism of complaint. We now receive some of the complaints already. All right. Now challenges. I think this is my last slide. Challenges. I think ICHR has a lot of challenges because the human rights problems are also huge in this region. But specifically to ICHR, we still have a lack of protection mandate and capacity to respond to the problems. Secondly, human rights are not part of your foreign policy priority of ASEAN member states, and lack of political will from ASEAN member states. ICHR is a product of regionalism project in ASEAN. So the one that creates ICHR was the member state. So if there is no political will on the side of member state, ICHR will be rather difficult to move forward. Even though with this lack of political will, ICHR has addressed some of the issues, has established their own identity as educator, catalysator, and so on and so on.
In order to make it friends familiar with you. Yeah,
right.
Pak Effendi Yamin is a former chair of ASEAN Intergovernment Commission, AICHR. He has a great and long experiences in the international affair, both in non-government organizations and intergovernment institutions. He was joined with Amnesty International. He was also a founder of Human Rights Working Group in Indonesia, and he is now as advisor for Human Rights Working Group, a network of in Indonesia. So when I first met Mas Andy, I was working at that time as a lawyer in legal aid in early 2000. I don't know whether Mas Andy remember about that. And at the time, we advocate about the urban poor community who were affected in Jakarta. And then at that time, I was offered to join with the international advocacy. I was visiting Mas Andy in Dutch, yeah, several times as well.
Netherlands.
Yeah, in Netherlands, yeah. And then it was a great pleasure for me to learn a lot. Actually, Mas Andy is one of my mentor. Yeah. So Mas Andy also master degree graduated from Development Studies from Institute of Social Science, Erasmus University in Netherlands as well. So Mas Andy, my question for you, because you are working so long, yeah, with this area, you are working to do advocacy, a lot of issues of Indonesians' human rights violations. So how effective are the regional mechanisms in ASEAN, such as AICHR, yeah? And then how are the advocacy agenda for now in order to the protection of human rights in ASEAN? So please feel free, and then I really want you to have honest, talk about the Asian's mechanisms on human rights. The time is yours, Pak Andy.
Thank you, Ye. First, of course, I'd like to thank and congratulate Ye, Sriviyanti Ediono and Pak Gafar, both as a convener of this program. I think this is one of the very few master's degree program on human rights and democracy. I'm very glad to be part of this, and I'm the one who's always advocating universities and academic institutions to have a special master's degrees in the field of human rights and democracy. So now it's the reality. So it's part of really being trying to contribute directly to this program. I'm happy to meet Professor Thomas here and Professor Agus, as well as all participants of this course. My view and my sharing this morning is more or less the same what has been presented by Yuyun. I was in the I chair as one of the implementation of the so-called crossover strategy. My background is a civil society groups together with Yuyun, but we have decided a long time ago, one of the strategies is actually crossover. That means getting to inside the system and try to work within the system. And yeah, I did that. I mean, it was 6 years, the time of laying the foundation, how regional mechanisms should work. And it was started with a very strong advocacy together with Yuyun as well at that time, back in 2006, when the first time the ASEAN is drafting, sorry, it's not 2006. Yeah. 2006, 2006, when they are drafting the charter. And that was the beginning of the engagement with the regional mechanisms. As he already mentioned earlier, my activities on human rights was very much directly to the international advocacy, not the regional one. So that means advocacy target is the UN human rights systems, as well, both based on the charter, as well as system based on the treaty. I understand that most of you have already followed the courses, the earlier session that mentioned about international human rights mechanisms. Now this is the time to answer the question, why we have to engage with a regional human rights mechanisms. I think Yuyun already mentioned a part of it. We can go to the next slide. There are some common features of regional human rights mechanisms. It is established by, and it works under auspices of member state, the intergovernmental organization. In our context, in this region, is ASEAN. And in the whole Asia Pacific, I think ASEAN is the only regional mechanisms exist. In the regional human rights mechanisms, only state may be held accountable for any allegation of human rights violations. So it is not a tribunal that can seek accountability of individual responsibility, such as court in the ICC, the International Criminal Court. The third one, it has a function of standard setting. Yuyun already mentioned it. Standard setting in terms of human rights, guidelines, instruments, and plan of actions, and also institutional building. Institutional building in the context of how to make the mechanisms works well or effective. Number 4, promotion and protection, as well as monitoring activities. And the last part is providing complaint mechanisms. So we have heard already from Yuyun that for the ICHR, the last function of complaining mechanisms was only agreed 10 years after the existence of the ICHR. It was in 2019, right? While since the beginning, I've been advocating that the mechanisms, or regional mechanisms, should have a complaint mechanisms. And that was already in the negotiation of the term of reference of the ICHRs. Of course, in the Indonesian context, the background, we have quite strong national human rights institution. At least the basic function of the national human rights institution is there. Yeah, monitoring, protecting by providing mechanisms of complaint. That is as a basis to be advocated at regional level. We go to the next slide. I will be fast in some of the next because a lot of things are more informative, but please go earlier to the next. Yeah. Why advocating regional human rights mechanisms? You already mentioned that it has an intermediary roles between national human rights institution or mechanism, the regional one, and the international mechanisms. How they intermediate? Because there is always a collaboration, a potential collaboration at all level of the function. All level means all kind of the function in terms of standard setting, in terms of dissemination of international standard, in terms of protection activities. There are examples that special rapporteur of the UN mechanisms collaborate with the special rapporteur from the regional human rights mechanisms, not in the ASEAN context, but there is, a potential collaboration in all kind function of human rights mechanisms. Regional human rights mechanisms are perceived to have more understanding about historical, socioeconomic, and sociocultural context of the specific region. That means in the standard setting, they can make a priority or prioritizing, a certain instrument or guidelines or any other tools that could address a specific issues in the region. A very simple example, the Latin American human rights mechanisms, they particular specific character of the region is the existence, the strong existence of the indigenous people. Indigenous peoples very much not only advocating, but very much live in the context of collective rights. So the collective rights are much more developed from the perspective or from the region of Latin America. The third one, the features, only regional human rights mechanisms could develop guideline, region-specific standard setting. An international one, like any treaty bodies or special procedures, cannot make and do not have an authority to set up a standard setting in the region. At the same time, implementation of all international standards will have to be lies basically at the national level, and the regional mechanisms function to actually support the activities, the protection, the standard setting at the national level. So you already mentioned about the role of advocating better human rights mechanism at the national level by trying to advocate that each of the ASEAN member states should have a national mechanisms. If you don't like the word NHRI, at least you have some mechanisms. Okay. The next slide. Now, I don't want to go to a bit history, but it is a long journey of human rights in the ASEAN. Before I start advocating back in 2006, there was already an effort of 15 years advocacy to create an ASEAN human rights mechanisms. Started back in 1993. And these are the milestones of the process. If you see here, Cebu Declaration in 2007, that was actually the first ever declaration coming out from the member state of ASEAN that says directly about or commit or agree to protect the rights, the human rights, are very specific on the rights of migrant workers. And you see it developed, and the charter is 2008, the TOR is 2009, ICHR was established, and 2010, there was the ACWC, the ASEAN Commission on Women and Children was established. Only within 1 year, the two mechanisms was established at that time. The next slide. Yuyan already mentioned about the character of ICHR. I can go to the next slide. The next slide, please. Yes. Yeah. In short, I've been using these tools presentation tailored from different training that HRWG also has. I think Yuyan also very familiar with this slides. There are opportunity, of course, to engage with the ICHR. First, you identify which one is the progressive ICHR reps, which one are more like-minded and open-minded to engage. And then related project that can be tapped for LGBT issue, study on legal aid, symposium, judiciary, the media, human rights, etc. And Article 4.10 of the TOR provide an opportunity to get information from the member state on the human rights situation. Article 4.11, the ICHR has a mandate to develop common position on human rights in ASEAN. And challenges there. There are some issues which is still very sensitive. For example, the issue of non-discrimination should be also applied to the SOGI issues, people with a different sexual orientation. Access to information in the beginning of first 6 years was very, very difficult, and it is much more developed now in the UN period. And no power to question, no power to investigation, or directly visit the country to investigate human rights violations. These are the things that still have to be part of the advocacy. So the key advocacy agenda for regional mechanism in ASEAN very much also heavily on the institutional building of how a regional human rights mechanism should work. It will be different when we have already a set of a strong and powerful regional human rights mechanisms, which has a power to investigate, which has authority to receive complaint, which has already a court to really address the case to the human rights court, such as in the African context, in the European context, as well as Latin American context. So very much heavily on the advocacy of the institutional building of regional mechanisms. The next slide. ACWC, the ASEAN Commission on Women and Children. This is very specific on violence against women. So the opportunities are there. Engaging in the monitoring and review of ASEAN member state on the implementation of Regional Plan of Action, RPA. engage in the ASEAN Progress Report on women enhancement and gender equality, enabling environment for children to participate in decision-making process, good precedents in producing documents, engagement with CSO. The challenges are there, the list of challenges. One of the challenges have no power of monitoring nor conducting investigation. So this is more or less the same with the ICHR. We go to the next slide now. I will be much faster now because I think one slide I spent more than 1 minute. This is another committee, another mechanisms, which was at a different level, but still very useful for those who are advocating migrants' workers' rights. I mentioned about Cebu Declaration. The Cebu Declaration was actually the basis of the establishment of this committee. Yeah, one of the agenda in 2007 is actually to create a binding norms that protect migrant workers' rights in the region. But these binding norms was adopted in 2017, not as a binding norm, but more, how do you call that? It's more, it's not a legally binding norms because I think there was no consensus to make it as a legally binding norms, but as something that become more, how do you call that? It has more authorities to implement the norms which are already there stated in the declaration. So that's the ASEAN Consensus of on the protection of migrant workers. So we have 3 bodies as a target of advocacies in the ASEAN context. The next one. The next slide, please. Yeah. The challenges. Let's go to the earlier one. I just want to mention again the challenges. It was already mentioned. We have 10 member countries, you know. As a matter of fact, Iyi in the introduction already said, we still have 2 authoritarian government, military government as a member states, and now even the latest one is the coup, former military junta government became democratic for several years, for almost 10 years, and now back to square one, become a military junta again. So these are the challenges, you know, the fact that we have to deal with different kind of member state with a different level on the implementation of human rights and democracy. Although these 10 ASEAN member states have already agreed in principle with the charter that it is already a legally binding norms, you know, commitment to the rule of law, good governance, and respect to fundamental rights are already legally binding norms. But still, in the implementation, we still have a different level of implementation of the human rights. The last challenge here I like to mention here is an effective alignment process between the ICHR and other related human rights mechanisms within the ASEAN, as well as human rights mechanisms at the national level and the international level. I would say it is still very, there are still a lot can be done in terms of collaboration between different level of human rights mechanisms. That includes as well the engagement of civil society. Okay, next slide. This is going back to the norms. The ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, although it was heavily criticized by international community, by civil society, but these are at least some of the value added of the MHRD, which is not there in the UN Declaration of Human Rights. For example, on the articulation of marginal and vulnerable groups. The marginal and vulnerable groups is a kind of an opening door that in the process of implementation of the declaration, that marginal and vulnerable groups will have to be much more inclusive. Yeah. For example, now the people with different sexual orientation is one of the marginal vulnerable groups that will have to be taken seriously in the regional. But as it is now, it is still a process to really convince member states to take this up, okay? And then another one, which is very interesting here, is on the articulation of freedom of religions, the articulation of freedom from interference of personal data. Now we are living in the digital rights. It becomes much more relevant on the implementation of the Article 21. So these are not there in the UDSR in 1948. These are not there in the in other regional human rights standard. The next slide. Aside from, I've already mentioned about the region-specific rights in other region, and if you read the ASEAN Universal Declaration, you will see development is very much one of the priority of the 10 member states. That's why rights to development was articulated with 3 articles from 35 until 37. And one new rights, which is also invented and proposed and advocated by the ASEAN, is the right to peace. And we all know, understand now that the right to peace become a discourse at the international level as well, you know, in the context of whether it is right to peace or right for peace. Okay, next slide. This part, I will go faster. I think I've already taken almost more than 10 minutes. These are more practical. Cso Advocacy using a different kind of strategies. Yeah, maximizing the affiliation status to influence policy. Practice first, institutionalize later. Practicing dialogue, creating safe space. Creating safe space, that's one of the things I like to underline. Constituency building, seeking the accountability, strategy of crossing over, like what I did as well as Yuyun did. Engage in the agenda and norm setting, agenda setting as well as norm setting, proposing issue and engage in the issue and policy research, engage in the media advocacy, joint project, people-to-people approach, and of course, it will be helpful, however, to perceive civil society is not a single entity. It is the job, it's the work of civil society as well, you know, to make their work more effective, not overlapping, not kind of would like to be, how do you call that? Well, the dynamic among civil society is also very important to make the civil society to address what EO always asked in the beginning, effectiveness of advocacy at the regional level. It's also very much depend on how civil society consolidated themselves. The more friction you have in the civil society, it will be very counterproductive for the advocacy. And in my experience in the last 20, 30 years, it happens that the frictions sometimes can jeopardize one of the advocacy goals. Okay, next slide. Constructive engagement. This is very much a strategy that that will be, you know, I will need more time to explain this, but I just want to highlight one point. Framing the issue is very important. Mapping spaces of engagement, assessing the capacity, and the articulation of your goals, strategy, action for constructive engagement is a challenge. And of course, evaluating the impact. What is your impact? What is the outcomes? Whether you make an impact or not. That will be part of the cyclus of constructive engagement. The next slide. The engagement dimension is inside and outside. There are NGO group or civil society group who has a confrontational attitude. Their engagement is actually confronting. Yeah, and disruptive direct action. That's not, I'm not saying that's not good. It is good to some situation, but it is not always good when you would like to engage and to build trust and to make change into some policy. Then you have to shift your strategy into the inside engagement process. It's more policy process, it's more seeing the policy process as potential gain. That policy process is not a threat, but it is a potential gain. So these are the things that the principle is very important from the perspective of advocacy civil society. The next slide. You mentioned about layers, yeah, layers, and in the context of ASEAN, layers of advocacy, of course, in the main target will be the ASEAN, the ICHR, the ACWC, the ICHR reps, the ACWC reps, and the first layer is more at the level of the member state. Who are the member state? That's a committee of permanent reps. Those are the ambassadors of 10 ASEAN member states in Jakarta, and the high-level panels, high-level task force, and then engage with the ASEAN Secretary General, yeah, and all relevant body within the ASEAN Secretary General. And the last layer, or the second layer of the advocacy, of course, the summit itself. And this meeting with the leaders, meeting with the senior officer meeting is part of the different layers of engagement with ASEAN. Next slide. This is just one example of advocacy, way forward advocacy back in 2015. In 2015, these are the points which was formulated. It was formulated after the end of my term that these are the things that has to be carried forward. And one of them is strengthening ICHR Secretariat, continuing strengthening protection mandate. And it is continued work, and we know that 2019, ICHR already agreed. And back in 2016-15, that was still an effort, that was still an appeal. Next slide. Human rights working group approach, this is our approach. We have three approaches in our engagement. Strengthening the national capacity. We do a lot of capacity building for civil society organization at different ASEAN member states. We support the capacity building of the civil society in the region. We engage with the critical engagement and, of course, the crossing over strategy. So from the human rights working group, I was the one who will cross over as the ASEAN reps inside the system, unions inside the system, and we have another one at the national level, which is now the commission, the Commissioner of National Human Rights Institution, or Komnas HAM, is a former deputy of Human Rights Working Group. So these are the approaches that we have been doing so far as civil society. Next one. The result, there are more space for CSO engagement, more influence. Civil society has more influence on ASEAN documents, more confidence amongst ASEAN-related institutions, and more interest from wider layers of civil society groups to engage with ASEAN, and the increased recognition of the role of civil society from the ASEAN circles, the member state, the Secretary General, and other bodies related to the ASEAN. Next one. These are just some case study how the engagement of civil society in the human rights norm setting. Almost in all process of the development of the institution, the civil society has engaged so much and has an influence in their establishments. The next slide. These are some examples of the spaces, creating space for dialogues. The next slide. Is thank you very much. Thank you. I hope I'm not taking so much time. I think too much already, you know.
I
20
think
minutes.
I think that's fine, Mas Andy, because your presentation is very comprehensive. There are a lot of insight that we can get from your presentation. So I think everyone, it is very clear that the mechanism is very dynamic, yeah, depending on social and political context that established in each country as well. And the other issues that are very clearly stated by Mas Andy is related to the rule of movement, yeah, human rights movement, in challenging the mechanism. So they have a different strategy. One is working within the mechanism, as like Mas Andy and Mbak Yuyun experiences themselves. They were actually, Mas Andy were part of the mechanism as well. And the other one is the pressure group. So the engagement of the keyword in terms of to effectiveness the mechanism, whether the engagement within NGOs and the governments, and then this engagement is very important in order to strengthen the capacity of the institution, in order to strengthen the fulfillment of human rights in Southeast Asian countries. So I think there are a lot of issues that's mentioned, Mas Andy. So thank you very much, Mas Andy, for sharing your insight. Yeah. So now we are moving to the third speaker, which is Prof. Thomas Smith. I usually call him not Prof. Smith, it's very formal. I call him Pak Thomas. Yeah. Pak Thomas is actually DAD lecturer at University Gadjah Mada, Faculty of Law, since 2018. His expertise is actually with regard to European law, constitutional law, administrative law, and also comparative law. Yeah, he has been experienced working in different universities, such as in Göttingen, Peru, and then of course also in Hanoi University. I think there are a lot university as well, but I'm so sorry I couldn't. I'm worried that I couldn't spell it very correctly because it is not English language. Yeah. So how are you, Pak Thomas?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me here to this interesting discussion.
Yeah.
And
yes,
I'm sorry, I have a little health problem today, but I hope I can do that. If not, I will need to stop. I don't know what that is.
All right.
Okay, but I'm very happy to be here in this interesting discussion.
Yep.
I would like to thank the two speakers for their very interesting presentation to see what is already going on in ICHA. That's quite a lot to see that. And also in the ACWC, that's quite interesting. My comment will be from the European perspective.
Yes, Pak Thomas, that is true. So actually, we invite Pak Thomas in order to share your analysis about the development in human rights mechanism in Asia, Southeast Asian, especially you are expertise in European human rights mechanism. So how do you see this? So you can give your comment in order to compare with European. In European, there is no European Commission, but in European mechanism. Time is yours, Pak Thomas.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, thank you very much. So my background is not from the political side, not from the NGOs. Although I was active in Amnesty International for some years. My background is that of European constitutionalism. That means very strong human rights protection at the constitutional level. And of course, these are different standards. What is interesting for me, the commitment to human rights is one of the ASEAN principles under Article 2, Section 2, ASEAN Charter. You see, I come from the legal perspective. However, from the perspective of international human rights experts, the ASEAN human rights mechanisms are still deficient. Why? Well, the most important Asian human rights document, that is the Asian Human Rights Declaration of 2012, is not legally binding. It's only soft law, it's only political. And the ICHA is not a human rights court, it's not even a treaty body, like the weak bodies under the United Nations treaties, but it's just a political advisory body. So also what we have seen today is basically a political mechanism. Moreover, what I can say from the European and also from the global experience in the protection of human rights is that only with the Commission you cannot effectively protect human rights. A Commission is helpful, but simply not enough. Moreover, the Asean Human Rights Declaration has been prepared in 2011, 2010, 2012 without a public discourse and without the consultation of the civil society, which was not happy about that. Then this declaration has been imposed by the heads of state and government in the style of absolutist monarchs in the 19th century. When you read the beginning of the Asian Human Rights Declaration, everything becomes clear. It says, we, the heads of state government. That's it. So it was a dictated human rights declaration. Well, concerning the substance of the Asian Human Rights Declaration, some important rights are missing. For example, the freedom of association. Well, there are some reasons for that. And also, there are some controversial passages in Article 6 and 7 which threaten to dilute or restrict the significance or substance of the human rights. So among the lawyers, these passages are very controversial. Anyway, the Asian Human Rights Declaration is an important first step, especially for the Asian human rights dialogue, with some innovative approaches too, for example, the right to development, the right to peace, or more interesting, even the right to safe drinking water and sanitation, Article 28, litera E. This Human Rights Declaration is also a progress that, it's a big progress, that unlike in the past, under Article 35 of this declaration, the right to development cannot be invoked anymore to justify violations of human rights. So politically, this was a big step. Anyway, this is the most important document. There is no international human rights treaty in ASEAN so far. And it's interesting to see the impact. For example, it's very interesting to see that the ICHA has now established a complaint mechanism. But this complaint mechanism has a very, very weak legal basis. There cannot be tough powers to investigate, tough powers to summon high officials, as we have that, for example, in Europe, without a sound basis in an international treaty. So it's a big step which is happening now already, but it's still from the European perspective, right from the beginning. We know from the European experience, from the American, and also at the moment from the African experience, that only a strong human rights court can actually provide a sound protection of human rights. There is a reason why the African Court on Human and People's Rights is under attack at the moment, because the African mechanisms works well, and it works too well for some African leaders. So for that reason, I think that ASEAN still needs to go some way. Well, I have some questions. First, to my dear colleagues from ICHA. First, as most important human rights document in ASEAN, as soft law also, the Asian Human Rights Declaration should influence both the legislation and the interpretation and application of the national law in all Asian member states. It should be a standard which is usually checked before making or interpreting or applying a law. Is this monitored by ILCHA? And what are the experiences so far? For example, are there collections of important examples like bills or court decisions which explicitly refer to the Asian Human Rights Declaration or to any other document, or at least to the Asian principles under Article 2, Section 2, which oblige all Asian members in a legally binding way to be committed to the protection of human rights? The second question is, when I look at the IHR website, it informs well about the Commission and its work, but it does not provide so much substantial info on human rights. So if you compare that, for example, with the website of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights, why is there not more information on the substance of human rights provided? Is there a lack of money? Is there too much pressure? Is the Commission in itself too small? It looks a little bit too like that to me. And last question, both speakers have underlined that the mechanisms in Asia need to be strengthened. As a lawyer, I think this can only be by binding interregional law. That means a geo-regional law, Asian International Human Rights Treaty. What do you think? Is there any perspective of drafting an Asian Human Rights Convention, or maybe even an Asian Women's Rights Convention, or other specific human rights treaties, and on transforming IHR into a classical geo-regional human rights commission with also judicial functions in the near future? Do you see any perspective that the development in ASEAN will go to a legally more sound, and that means a more powerful mechanism, human rights mechanism in Asia? Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Thomas. As a commentator today, Pak Thomas emphasizes the progress, but also the challenge, future challenge. And there are three big questions comes to our speakers today. So before Mbak Yuyun and Mas Andy answer the question, I also invite you guys to give questions. You can use chat, or you can directly to raise hands, so I can recognize you and give you time to have a question. So if any wants to raise a question, yes, beside Pak Thomas, there is also Prof. Agustinus who wants to ask question. Please, Pak Agustinus, time is yours.
I have two small questions. According to Yuyun, there is a lack of protection mandates in IHR. I would like to ask a question about migrant workers. Concerning this, a number of Indonesian migrant workers are undocumented migrants. For example, they cross the border of West Kalimantan and Sarawak. Although there is lack of protection mandates in IHR, I think this institution should have a position about this. So my small question is, what is IHR position of this matter? This is a question for Mbak Yuyun. Then my questions for Pak Rafendi Jamin. My questions is about promotion and protection of the rights of migrant workers. First questions is, what recommendations can ICHR provide to the Indonesian and Malaysian governments about undocumented workers crossing the border? Then second question about human rights advocacy concerning to dialogue and consultation. How to build dialogue and consultation among human rights institutions and among ASEAN states concerning undocumented migrant workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Agustinus. I think while we are waiting for other participants who actually ask question, there is another question actually. We can invite Pak Simon. Would you mind to share your question directly?
Yeah, all right. Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody from Kathmandu, Nepal. I mean, my question is about, what could be doable, feasible, in the advocacy agenda, especially from the perspective of civil society. What the civil society in the region should focus on, especially to engage more countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, perhaps Singapore, now that they have an opposition that is stronger. So these are the three countries that perhaps are in a better position to advocate. So what should be these things? So, and one suggestion or one idea, maybe a more structural engagement with the civil society, or what else? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pak Simon. I think three person has already raised questions very thoroughly. Yeah, Pak Thomas, Prof. Agustinus, and Pak Simon. I give opportunity to Mbak Yuyun first to answer the question. Thank you.
Can we have one person, women, to ask question, please?
That's true. Is there any more question? I think we will go through later on. We do believe that they are. Hazrin also raised the hand. So perhaps for the first session, we can answer 3 questions, and then we will continue to have more question and answer.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. On the first question, relation to what Pak Thomas asked related to the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. As rightly said that ASEAN Human Rights Declaration is non-legally binding. ICHR is also intergovernmental body. So ICHR is not in the position to enforce something with the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, but rather providing interpretation to the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration for member states to adjust, to then revisit their own national laws or policies. Just to give you some of the insight in ICHR, the word, even we have to negotiate what kind of term we should be used in terms of interpretation. So the TOR mentioned about providing technical advices, technical assistance, advisory services, but it doesn't mean that we can use, when we use the term, it was accepted by ICHR, because we have tried. First, we have tried general comments to the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. rejected. And then we also provide advisory support for the ASEAN Members Declaration rejected. And then now we finally agreed to come up with the term recommendation on the implementation of the ASEAN Members Declaration. So this is actually a similar thing. It's just a matter of how to put terms that make member states feel comfortable with. The European Court also used this term, recommendation on the implementation of the European Convention on Human Rights. The CEDAW also used general recommendation and not general comment. So, so the term seems like still within the context and within what we are trying to do. How to do this? First, we need to organize number of consultation in relation to certain articles that we want to elaborate. So far, we have been addressing Article 22 on freedom of religion belief, Article 23 on freedom of expression opinion, Article 4 on migrant workers, Article 35 until 37 on right to development, Article on right and also on right to peace, Article 5 on right to effective remedy, Article 14 on prevention and countering torture. So this is how we have been approaching the ASEAN Members Declaration to provide interpretation, but the interpretation should be coming from government's practices, what has been done in this particular area. So ICHR's role is to provide a platform in which member states can share experiences and then also their insights, what works, what doesn't work, and then they can learn each other because the context is quite different from one to another. And so, for instance, I just give you the example. We did the workshop on how to mainstream human rights in development programs of ASEAN member states. And one or two member states approached me saying, "Thank you very much for inviting us here. Now we know how to mainstream human rights into our development agenda." So we talked to the national development agencies in ASEAN countries. And then they said, back home to Vientiane, back home to Phnom Penh, we are going to have a meeting among the planners and try to put together in some of the rights that we mentioned in this meeting into our program, because they said they don't have to wait for another 5 or 10 years to have a new development program. They can do it. But this to me is very good feedback from member state, and they learn it from other member state how they do it, because when government talk to another government peer to peer, they seem to be speaking in the same language, and now they know very well on the challenges and how to include, and so they actually talk in technical term, which understood well. So that's how we do this. In the session of sharing of practices and experiences, usually we will know how member states perceive their own laws. So instead of monitoring what they are doing, which actually we know, but we don't want to be seen as police of human rights, but rather bringing them into a dialogue and let them see this is not what human rights want in terms of ideas. So that's kind of engagement we have with ASEAN member states. So instead of monitoring of the policies of in the region, we provide a platform in which we can learn together. We develop together, we change together in ASEAN. And ICHR has channel to member states. Compared with others, we have a channel. We have ways to talk to them because we are overarching. We are also some of us coming from member states. This is the body that established by member states. So we have channel to talk to them and bring them into one meeting and talk about human rights. Some member states are not comfortable talking about human rights, but when ICHR invited them, they will come. So we are trying to use this as maximum as we can to have a conversation in the region. But of course, changes not happen one night. It's a process too. In terms of website, there are a number of governments are still feeling uncomfortable of putting some issues or what we have discussed, substantive issues that we have discussed in our meeting or our workshop. But gradually, some member states agreed, because if we don't have a consensus on what to be put in the public space, we cannot put anything there. But gradually, some states already feeling comfortable. So I think it is not a matter of lack of resources. Yes, we still have a lack of money and everything, but actually the more important problem is rather the level, the comfort level of member state on, because they feel like we are exposing the problem. In fact, in our point of view, we cannot solve the problem without recognizing the problem first. No, but again, more and more, I think in the last 11 years, member states are arriving at the point in which they can discuss human rights problem issues in this kind of platform, and then open up more, because we do not approach the issue by criticism, but rather by learning together. So this is something that we need to establish together. Human right has already bad name in terms of naming and shaming, and this is something that we do not use in ICHR or in ASEAN in general. In terms of legal approach to human rights, I wrote an article in 2013 or 14 that I rejected any effort from ICHR to come up with convention, especially when their first project will be the Convention on Women's Rights, because in that time it was not, ICHR was not ready to do that. ASEAN Human Rights Declaration has been criticized of being watered down some of the international system, but I have to disagree with you, Pak Thomas, that the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration was not consulted with stakeholders. It was, and Pak Raffendi was part of the drafter, so he might be able to provide more explanation about this. But I was part of civil society who advocate for the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. But yes, freedom of association was not there or removed from ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. But in terms of consultation, the event was there. What was not there is the share of the document. So I remember we meet with ICHR, but we did not have the draft of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. Actually, we do not know what in it. So that's what about the discussion. But now I would like to go back to the legal approach to the human rights. So that was, now I remember it was to 2013 that I wrote an article in Jakarta Post for ICHR that expressing my disagreement on the project of drafting the Convention on Human Rights, especially women's rights. Not about the women, but about the convention itself. But now, after 11 years, if we continue to do this, providing interpretation to ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, perhaps we will be arriving, or we will be ready to go for legal approach to human rights, because we have discussed a number of things. We the content, the substance, the weight on, and the focus of each article will be there. And in 5-year work plan, we have included legal instrument on human rights. In fact, this kind of discussion actually has started in 2015. There were 2 workshops in relation to legal instrument to human rights. It actually say that in ICHR, we have that in our mind. It's just we want to do it step by step. We want to do it very carefully. Otherwise, we put human rights into this box and again watering down the substance of human rights. So we wanted to do it step by step. It will take a little bit longer, fine, as long as we do not negotiate or we do not compromise the content of the international human rights norms. So please expect that in the next 5 years, 2021, 2025, we are going to have a discussion on legal instrument on human rights. And we actually, ICHR is in the right place to do so because we are established by the charter. So the way we work based on the TUR, but we are established by the charter. So in terms of body, we are quite strong in ASEAN. In terms of Pak Agustinus' question on undocumented migrant workers, the issue of migrant workers continue to be sensitive in ASEAN and in ICHR. ASEAN countries consist of the countries of sending and receiving countries as well as transit countries. So different interests altogether. But in 2017, there was already ASEAN Consensus on the name of the document is Asean Consensus on the Protection and Promotion of the Right of Migrant Workers, which number of progresses already achieved. For instance, in the past, ASEAN talk about illegal migrant workers. That words now no more in the document, and the impact has been very strong. For instance, but not by not mentioning migrant workers as illegal. The question or the approach to security gone in that document. By putting undocumented migrant workers, the approach of ASEAN to migrant workers is rather on labor rights and human rights. Does ICHR has a position on undocumented migrant workers? So far, ICHR has not come up with a position on certain issues. But of course, ICHR uphold the right of migrant workers. Article 4 in ASEAN Human Rights Declaration actually talk about the right of migrant workers are human rights. We also have, ICHR also has the responsibility to promote the instrument of human rights in ASEAN, regardless who will be producing that document. In 2012, again, I will have to mention Pak Rafendi. Pak Rafendi already introduced the project on the research on migration management. This is another approach to prevent the undocumented migrant workers. We want migrant workers to be documented. Sometimes because they run away from their employers, they end up with losing their document and they become undocumented migrant workers. So that concern already included in the ASEAN Consensus on the protection of migrant workers. But ICHR come up with a research on the migration management to see what is actually exists, what are the gaps, where ICHR or ASEAN bodies need to insert their efforts to do to complement or to complete the puzzle of migrant management in the region. The research now almost done, so the draft is already is done. Now read under the reading of the ICHR. We hope by end of this year we can publish it for public, and we will come up with some recommendation.
Thank you, Mbak Yuyun. I think
so. I answered all questions, huh?
I think so. Later on, Pak Rafendi will also answer some questions that are not yet discussed with Mbak Yuyun. Yeah. That's okay. Yeah, I think thank you, Mbak Yuyun. It's very interesting information, additional information that's very important as well for us to know about the dynamic, about the approach of the institution, yeah, in order to tackle the issues. It is very interesting, not shaming and then naming, but it more likely dialogue to constructive dialogue in order to encourage the state, the member to uphold human rights issues and then implement it into the domestic level. Yeah, so that's very interesting strategy. So Pak Raffendi, time is yours to answer some questions. I think it's about 5-7 minutes. Yeah.
5-7 minutes? Well, I need 20 minutes.
So some questions from Pak Agus and then also Pak Simon. Yeah.
There are already a lot of questions I see on the chat.
Yeah, that's true.
Probably
So you
about
can
9
also
questions.
Yeah,
And
later on we
very,
will open the question again. Yeah,
they are very much interesting, question. Okay, allow me now first to respond to Pak Thomas. Thank you, Pak Thomas, for your comments. I need to explain or clarify some things. I agree with you. I think to see that ICHR as a regional human rights mechanisms compare with others, it still belong to a political advisory bodies. You're right. Since the beginning, it was called ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission of Human Rights. That was already part of the negotiation during the establishment. Indonesia at that time, the negotiator from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs doesn't want to have the intergovernmental. They want to have ASEAN's Human Rights Commission, that's it. But consensus cannot be reached. So the consensus, it will have to be with the intergovernmental, just to make some member states feel comfortable that this is an intergovernmental process. This is among member states. Yeah. So that's exactly correct what you're saying. And we are playing in that level. So creating human rights mechanisms, of course, it was always started through a political process. Yeah. And if you look at the SARC, we have some participants from the South Asia here. SARC has been there for so long. And let me put this question. Have they ever been able to create one mechanisms at all? There is no mechanisms. You look at the other regional in Asia Pacific sub-region, in East Asia. If you look at the other region where South Asia, you have an intergovernmental organization, you have ASEAN, but in East Asia, that's more problematic because then you have a Taiwan there, and you have a China there as a big one. It is almost impossible to create a regional intergovernmental organizations in East Asia. So that's why to see that as a political process is just by nature. And when we were discussing about creating, we learned a lot from the context of Africa, European context, as well as the Latin American context. And as you're all aware that we would like to take some lesson from the existing court in Europe, for example. The implementation of the court decision still have to be safeguarded by a political body, right? So even though it is a legally binding thing, when it tried to make change, the implementation of court decision is under the political body, is the council, the European Council will have to decide on the implementation of the member state. So then we are learning through this process. And I think in the context of this ASEAN, now coming to the question of what doable or what not doable from Simon, there are so many things now becoming doable compared to 5 years ago, compared to 10 years ago within ASEAN. Yeah, you already mentioned all fundamental rights that are very sensitive in this region: freedom of expression, freedom of religions and beliefs, yeah? Freedom of torture, from torture, Those are the things are already agreed now as a program in the work plan of ASEAN, of ICHR. I've been trying to negotiate to convince that torture should be one of the ICHR priority. But I cannot get the consensus in my time. But now it's there. So that means these are the things that you are making change. You are making change not only in the region, but also in the member state. Yeah. So these are the things I think a lot of things are doable because then you engage through these issues. Union has organized workshop engaging a lot of civil society on freedom of religion of belief, for example. Even the exile group of Vietnam was involved in the workshop. Of course, the Vietnamese reps were not happy with it, but they are there. So they are in the context of dialogue and discussion, you see? So these are the things that, what are the good things, the positive point you can make use of a regional organization like the IHR and any other, yeah? That is a general comment, and specifically for Professor Agus, the ASEAN Consensus, as Yuyun already said, ASEAN Consensus on the protection of migrant workers, that is already so much developed in terms of you have to respect the rights regardless of the status. It's there already. And now we are engaging the migrant workers, civil society groups, very much engaging on the implementation of the consensus. Because when you're not going to implement that, it becomes a paper that that means nothing on the ground. And now engaging the implementation, HRWG has been conducting consultation with civil society and with government of almost 10 member states before the pandemic. The last one was in Cambodia. And then 18th of March, the pandemic was all over Southeast Asia. We cannot go anymore to talk with the government directly, to engage with the civil society at the national level. On the implementation, how are we going to implement that? Even in the Vietnam context, a close country on authority with a character of authoritarian government, one state party, they are engaging civil society on the protection of migrant workers. It was there in the discussion, what are the priorities, what can be done, you know, there are spaces available. So even in the context of authoritarian government or close government, one state party, there are still space for civil society. Yeah? By using the ASEAN. Without the ASEAN context, there is no opportunity to go there, or limited. Maybe there is, but limited. But it gives opportunity for that. So that's why I am a stronger believer of regional mechanisms will have more impact on the ground rather than international mechanisms. I just stop there for a while.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pak Raffendi. So there are a lot of questions already in the chat. Yeah, some questions are quite similar, and then some question has been answered actually. But I still want to invite them whether they have any follow-up questions. So I think there are 5 participants that I will invite. Yeah, and then perhaps you can ask a short, quick question. Yeah. So I start from. Just a minute. I start from Hazrim Azman, and then Gio, Yogi, Audrey, Hasnan, and Batista. And then the other one is Adnan. So please, very quick in share your questions. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Hazrin from Kuala Lumpur. I just want to know your view, the speaker's view on ACSC. I mean, how effective is the ACSC in advocating human rights in ASEAN? Because we know that there are so many safe space for the CSO to advocate the human rights. So one of it is the ACSC. So I would like to know your view on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Become our guest as well. Yeah, Azim. And then Gio, please, you have a very interesting question.
Thank you, Ibu. Thank you for the opportunity. My question is, how can developing countries with resource limitation be held to the same human rights standards as developed countries? So basically, I would like to know how to equalize the human rights standards around the world, whereas the condition is there is discrepancy of human resource development in every country. Thank you.
Thank you, Gio. Now I invite for Yogi, please.
Hello. Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to ask very quickly, has the IHR engaged cooperation with other ASEAN committees or commissions to address the linkages between human rights and other aspects of life, such as, working with the ASEAN Specialized Meteorological Center to address haze pollution, or maybe with the telecommunications sector to address privacy in the digital age? Thank you.
Thank you, Yogi. It's a very interesting question as well. So I invite Audrey.
Yes, thank you, Bu Iyi, for the time. I will also ask quick question. As well, you know that the principle of non-intervention is one of the highlights of the ASEAN. So I do wonder, does this principle also affect the work of HR? As we already know, it's always become quite a problem whenever we face human rights violation in some states too. Thank you, Bui.
Thank you, Audrey. So I invite Hasnan.
Okay, thank you, Mom. I'm sorry my camera is broken.
That's okay.
In my opinion, especially in Indonesia, with the principle of decentralization, we know local government play the most crucial role in the fulfillment of human rights agenda. So my question is, does IHR also carry a focus and have an agenda to strengthen or to engage in areas where local governments, for example, in Indonesia, take policy initiatives at the local level in the context of fulfilling human rights through, say, a framework of human rights city, for example? Thank you.
Yeah, Hasnan. So how does this regional mechanism go directly to the local mechanism and implementation in the local level? That's a very interesting question. Batista, I invite you to have a question as well.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Maybe my question has already answered, but I have another questions about the Human Rights Court. Is there any are there any indicators that we have to know about the Human Rights Court? Because Mr. Thomas has already said that only a strong human rights court can protect the human right. So that's my first question. And then the second question, maybe similar with Audrey, because we know that ASEAN has a principle that we know, which is non-intervention. Is this principle affect to the other members to give a different protection to the human rights? Because all countries have sovereignty. That's all, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. And then the last questions, I invite Adnan.
Thank you. I really agree with this ASEAN agreement, and that it is really a big political step. But my question here, what should make a state to change their policy? What should the obligation create to make a change the policy and setting a standard at the national level? Is it by creating ASEAN bill as normative ground, or is the activating civil society, or there have any alternative impact of other agreement, create other agreement to make other national member state to create obligation to change their policy or setting a standard like international level? Thank you.
Thank you, Adnan. So now I will invite Mbak Yuyun and for having 3 minutes because some of question has been answered, yeah, and then also Pak Raffendi 3 minutes, and then and also Pak Thomas 3 minutes as you know, kind of like concluding remarks. So please.
Wow, 3 minutes, yeah. Okay. Gio, for the developing countries, how developing countries can standardize human rights. So I think we need to look at in perspective, like, so for economic, social, culture, right, there is a concept of progressive realization. So that can be used as one of the approach to improve human rights. But on civil political rights, especially on derogable rights, whether you are a poor country or rich country, that rights remain the same. It is unfair to say that because you are poor, then you can be killed. No, cannot. And also I think we need to understand universality and uniformity. What human rights as member state to do is universal of human rights, not uniformity of human rights. So please, because 3 minutes, so I cannot explain this further. For the whether ICHR has engaged with other sectors, yes. Gradually, we have been engaging with Ministry of Environment. We come up now with the regional EIA, Environmental Impact Assessment, based on human rights. We also talk to different groups. ICHR has, which I would like to make this a credit to Pak Raffendi, because Pak Raffendi was the one who introduced this kind of mechanism of ASEAN community dialogue on human rights. So we bring all 3 communities to share how they implement ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. So this means that this is regional approach. When ICHR engage with ASEAN member states, that's rather the engagement regional and national. When ICHR organize ICHR ASEAN Community Council meeting on human rights, it's regional approach. Also on digital rights, I just tabled the concept note on freedom of expression and opinion, focusing on digital rights. The ASEAN Telecommunication Community bodies develop this ASEAN as a connected society or community or something. So ICHR would like to contribute to this kind of idea from the perspective of human rights. So again, we are inside the system, so we try to bring our role into different section in ASEAN, and also because our role is to mainstream human rights. So we target number of institution.
Thank
Decentralization,
you.
local government.
One more answer the questions, yeah, Mbak Yuyun.
Okay.
Yes.
So in ASEAN, there is a project of smart cities network. We also in ICHR, we also have SDG 11 project. This is on sustainable cities. Some countries are feeling uncomfortable having a title of human rights cities, but it's okay. So we can use SDG 11 on sustainable cities, in which we would like to provide an opportunity for mayors and also governors to share among themselves how they improve the services, governance, human rights in the city level and provincial level. There was also during Pak Jokowi when Pak Jokowi was the governor of Jakarta, he also organized ASEAN governors meeting and ASEAN mayors meeting. So there are a number of attention in ASEAN to bring or to make it down to earth, the implementation of human rights at the city level.
Thank you, Mbak Yuyun. So I hand it to Mas Andy, yeah, to answer several questions have not been yet answered.
Yeah, I think we just not yet answered is the SCAC and APF. Yes, SCAC and APF, of course, an asset. If we can still, as civil society, you will have to use it as a platform. We will have to use it as a regional level. But of course, as an individual, you can also use, because SCAC is more a very general, all issues are there, but you can also organize a small group of particular issues, and then you advocate, to very targeted bodies. That could do one way as well. But SCAC is more an annual meeting, and there are activities in between the SCAC. So yes, it is a useful platform to be used. because it is also already recognized by member states. All member states recognize it, although sometimes some member state doesn't want to host it, or they make their own ACAC, and then there is a competitor of ACAC coming in, but that's part of the dynamic in the process of ASEAN. The second one I like to say on non-intervention. Non-intervention is a legitimate reason, for any intergovernmental organization, legitimate basis. Without non-intervention principles, there is no United Nations. Okay, but the point is, you look at how are you going to implement human rights principles, in the context of non-intervention. I would say non-intervention is a flexible, it will develop, how you understand that. It is a matter of understanding it. How, when you commit with a commitment of human rights convention, you already have given your sovereignty to be part of the convention. So when you is the perspective, legal perspective, when you already give, you use your sovereignty to sign a convention and to be part of it, then you're already acting as a sovereign state. So there is no issue of non-intervention anymore. So these are the things you have to convince. We should not be, how to call that, feel blocked by saying, oh, because it's non-intervention, we cannot do anything. No, that's not true. You can always find ways to convince other member states. Even the issue of Rohingya, the ICHR talks about the issue of Rohingya within the ICHR. In different ways of communicating, different ways of talking about it, but it is possible. So please don't make it as a block, non-intervention, okay? The second one is on the
1 more minute, Pak.
1 minute,
yeah.
On the engaging, I don't know why, Pak Simon, I go back to the what is doable. What is doable, Pak, you look at the diplomatically, because I understand you are very interested to build, to look at what are the opportunity in the context of escalating and diplomatic actions in the context of ICHR, because it is a political body. Yeah, to identify Singapore as one of the proponents, I think it depends on the issue. When it comes to the issue of torture, very conservative. The one who is blocking my idea in the first 6 years when I was there is Singapore. Difficult to get a green sign from the capital, that they go along, because the Minister of Foreign Affairs, will depend on the Attorney General at the national level whether or not they agree, to discuss on. If the reps agree to discuss, when the Attorney General in the capital don't agree, then there is nothing, no consensus. You see, but now torture is already there, so that's why depends on the issue, but the representative, whether it is like-minded, open-minded, is one way to escalate any agenda of diplomacy at the regional level.
Thank you, Pak Raffendi. And then last time for Pak Thomas is a concluding remark, 1.5 minutes. Thank you.
I will try to do shortly. First of all, to my colleagues, thank you very much for your answers to my questions. I see that human rights protection is still a purely political process in ASEAN. And it's still right at the beginning. I thought it was already more progress, but I see, for example, from your answers that resistance from the governments is still the major concern. So this is a political fact to which, as a lawyer, I cannot comment. I would like to answer to 2 questions, however. First, non-intervention. I think if you think non-intervention seriously in the conservative traditional way, it's absolutely incompatible with geo-regional human rights protection. But as Mas Raffendi proposed, we could interpret it in a more narrow way today. So it's not the old idea of non-intervention of 20, 30, 40 years ago. What is interesting, because there was a question about indicators for the significance of court decisions. When you have a human rights court, there is one important difference. It does not need to be the decision implemented in the member states. It's not that the national government or the national parliament must do some act. The decisions of the human rights courts, in particular the interpretation of the convention, are directly binding. And in lots of cases, for example, similar cases, the courts will simply not apply anymore the national law. In most European countries, the European Convention has a legal status above statutory national law. So just below the Constitution. And that means that even the lower authorities and the courts, they will simply follow directly the European Court of Human Rights decision without asking the government or asking the national parliament anymore. So that is one reason why it has a huge practical effect. But I can see that maybe here it's not yet the time for that. Because one argument of Yun is quite important. I think if there is the risk of watering down the standards when you come to a legally binding convention, then you better don't do. We don't want to end up in a situation like in the Arab country with the Arab Charter on Human Rights, which is more fighting than protecting the human rights. So that's why for me, thank you very much. This was a very interesting discussion today.
Thank you, Pak Thomas. Thanks again, Mbak Yuyun and Mas Refendi Yamin. Your insights are very valuable for us in order to sharpening our knowledge on human rights, particularly human rights in practices. Yeah. So I think this is not the first moment we will engage with. I think we are open to have more collaboration in discussing further about the issues. And then I will remind you guys, tomorrow we still have a session which is actually focusing on discussion on national human rights institution in Indonesia. So today we are more likely discussing about regional level, but tomorrow we are more likely to discuss about national human rights institution, because Indonesia have a unique kind of mechanism. We have a general mechanism on human rights. We have a special mechanism on human rights with regard to children and women. So tomorrow is a good time for us also to rethink about whether it is valuable, whether it is workable in order to implement human rights in a domestic level. Thank you very much for your participation, guys, especially those who are actually gave questions. And then I hope all the question has been answered. And then see you again, and stay healthy. And then I think we want to open the camera and to say, to respect to others. Can we open the camera and claps? Yeah. 1, 2. Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.